Donald Whitten, stay beside the service counter.
I processed what came into the clerk's office. That was
The
my
investigation tied the Absentee ballot surge to false evidence.
Donald Whitten operated as Lincoln County's chief election officer for years, and not one person checked what was happening inside his office. Over 100 fraudulent ballots moved through his hands, and he personally lied to federal investigators when they came knocking.
An elected clerk does not personally know every voter's reason.
Bowman brought applications directly into your office, and they moved through your
You
process.
were turning the whole courthouse counter into proof I ran the election for him.
He would not get the chance to walk it back. Within 72 hours, federal investigators would seize the absentee ballot applications stacked in his Hamlin courthouse office. More than 100 of them written in handwriting that did not belong to the voters whose names sat on top. A sheriff, a clerk, a commissioner. 3 of the highest-ranking officials in Lincoln County, West Virginia, walking dirt roads with stolen ballots in their hands. What the retired FBI agent would uncover over the next 18 months would expose a fraud so small and so brazen it could only have happened in a place where everyone already knew everyone, and no one had bothered to look up in 6 years. Before we go any further, I have to ask you something. Have you ever cast an absentee ballot? Think about who handled it, who opened the envelope, who signed off on the application. Drop that in the comments and let me know if you ever wondered whether the person on the other end was actually doing their job. And if you're new to the channel, subscribe now. We cover the kind of accountability cases that local papers bury on page 9 and national outlets pretend never happened. Donald Cecil Whitten was born in 1950 in the unincorporated community of Branchland, West Virginia, a stretch of highway and creek bottom about 10 miles east of Hamlin. His father worked the number, 8 mine outside Madison until black lung pushed him off the seam in his late 40s. His mother kept house and clerked part-time at the post office in West Hamlin. There were 4 Whitten children. Donald was the second. The family lived in a 4-room frame house on a hillside above Mud River, and every photograph from his childhood shows the same brown clapboard siding, the same plank porch, the same view of the ridgeline turning red in October. He attended Hamlin High School, played second base on a baseball team that won 3 games his senior year, and worked summers stocking shelves at the Foodland on Route 3. Teachers remembered him as quiet, polite, and dependable. The yearbook caption under his senior portrait read, "Donald says little, but means it all." He graduated in 1968. He did not go to Vietnam. A bad knee from a high school football injury kept him out, and instead of college, he took a job at the Lincoln County Tax Office, filing property cards for a starting wage of $1.70 an hour. That is where county politics first reached for him. The tax office sat 1 floor below the county clerk's office, and Whitten ran errands between them every day. He learned how the deed books were stamped. He learned which families had been in the courthouse since before the First World War, and which families ran for office every election cycle, whether they had a chance or not. He learned the names of the precinct captains and the names of the men who drove voters to the polls in the back of pickup trucks. Lincoln County had only 46 precincts. By the time he was 25 years old, Donald Whitten could name the dominant family in every single one. He married Brenda Sue Adkins in 1973. She taught 4th grade at Duval Elementary. They bought a small 1-story house off Route 3 between Hamlin and Branchland, and stayed in that house for the next 39 years. 2 daughters, Karen and Lisa, were born in 1975 and 1978. The family attended Hamlin Memorial Baptist Church most Sundays, sat on the same pew, and ate Sunday dinner at his mother's house until she died in 1991. Neighbors described the Whittens as ordinary, hardworking, and unremarkable. Nobody on Route 3 had any reason to believe Donald Whitten would ever become a name in a federal indictment. He ran for the Lincoln County Clerk's office for the first time in 1990 as a Democrat. He lost. He ran again in 1994. He lost again by 61 votes. In 1998, the incumbent retired, and Whitten won the open seat with 53% of the vote. He took the oath of office in January 1999. He was 48 years old. He had spent 26 years in that courthouse, in one job or another, learning every drawer and every back stairway and every quiet way a piece of paper could move between offices without anyone signing for it. He was re-elected in 2004, the year the federal vote-buying case detonated under his colleagues. The prior circuit clerk, Greg Stowers, and the county assessor, Jerry Weaver, went to federal prison for the 2004 scandal. Whitten testified as a witness in some of those proceedings. He kept his job. The voters of Lincoln County sent him back to the county clerk's office in 2006 and again in 2010, by which point he had been the chief election officer of a county of 22,000 people for 11 straight years. The performance review language from his own personnel file used phrases like meticulous, institutionally loyal, and committed to the integrity of the office. He hung a framed copy of the West Virginia Oath of Office on the wall behind his desk. Visitors who walked into room 12 on the second floor of the Hamlin Courthouse could read it from across the room. To understand what Donald Whitten did, you have to understand exactly what an absentee ballot is in the state of West Virginia, and why his signature was the only signature that mattered. Under West Virginia law, a voter who wants to cast an absentee ballot must submit an application stating a legally recognized reason: illness, military deployment, working out of state, confinement. The application is a single page. It must be signed by the voter. It is mailed to or hand-delivered to the county clerk's office. The clerk's staff verifies the voter's registration, checks the stated reason, and if everything matches, mails the voter a ballot in a special envelope. The voter fills out the ballot in private, seals it in the envelope, signs the outside, and returns it by mail. That sealed envelope is opened only on election day, in the presence of canvassers, and the ballot is counted. The entire system rests on a single point of trust: the county clerk. He decides which applications get processed. He decides which ballots get mailed. He decides which envelopes are valid when they come back. In Lincoln County, in 2010, the county clerk was Donald Whitten. There was no second signature. There was no independent reviewer. There was no automated cross-check. The Secretary of State's office in Charleston received aggregate numbers after the fact, but the day-to-day decisions about who got an absentee ballot in Lincoln County happened entirely in room 12 on the second floor. Lincoln County had 46 precincts and about 14,000 active voters. In a normal primary, the county clerk's office would process somewhere between 200 and 500 absentee ballot applications, depending on the season and the ballot. Most absentee voters were elderly, in nursing homes, in military service, or recovering from surgery. The applications came in slowly, over a period of weeks, mailed individually from the voters themselves or dropped off by family members. That was the pattern. That had been the pattern for as long as anyone in the courthouse could remember. There was also the political culture. Lincoln County had been through the 2004 vote-buying convictions. The federal monitors had come and gone. The Department of Justice had sent observers to subsequent elections. By 2010, the federal attention had drifted elsewhere. The new generation of officials in the Hamlin Courthouse believed, with the confidence of men who had survived the last storm, that the worst was behind them. Donald Whitten had watched two of his colleagues go to prison, and he had kept his head down and kept his job. 6 years later, he believed he understood exactly how much could be done quietly and exactly how much could not. The scheme began in the late winter of 2010. Sheriff Jerry Bowman of Lincoln County, 58 years old, was running for circuit clerk in the May Democratic primary. His opponent was the incumbent, Charles Brumfield, who had held the office for years and who carried the unspoken endorsement of half the courthouse. Bowman was popular as a sheriff. He was not certain he could win the circuit clerk's race. He had built a career on knowing who owed him favors, and in the months leading up to the May 11th primary, he began calling those favors in. The first conversation between Bowman and Whitten about absentee ballots happened in February 2010 in the clerk's office on the second floor of the Hamlin Courthouse. According to the federal record, Bowman did not need to explain himself in great detail. He told Whitten he was going to need a lot of absentee ballots to come out of certain precincts in the eastern part of the county. He told Whitten he would deliver the applications himself. He told Whitten the applications would be in order. Whitten did not ask what in order meant. Bowman began producing absentee ballot applications in March. He did not produce them one at a time. He produced them in stacks. 10 at a meeting, 15 at the next, 20 after that. He walked them into the clerk's office and laid them on Whitten's desk, and Whitten processed them. By the end of the application window for the May primary, Sheriff Bowman had personally hand-delivered more than 100 absentee ballot applications to Donald Whitten's office. That was, by itself, an extraordinary number. It exceeded the entire normal absentee volume for Lincoln County in a primary year. The applications were not legitimate. The voters whose names appeared on them did not need absentee ballots. They were not sick. They were not in nursing homes. They were not deployed overseas. They were ordinary Lincoln County residents living in their own homes who, in many cases, did not know an application had been filed in their name at all. The reasons listed on the applications, in the blank spaces where the voter was supposed to certify why an absentee ballot was necessary, were written in handwriting that did not belong to the voters. Some of the applications listed illness. Some listed work travel. Some listed reasons that, when investigators interviewed the voters later, the voters laughed at and said they had never been any of those things. Whitten processed every single one. He stamped them. He logged them. He pulled the corresponding ballots from the secured supply, slipped them into the special envelopes, and either mailed them out or, in a number of cases, handed the envelopes back to Sheriff Bowman to be delivered to the voters. That was the second part of the operation. The part that turned a paperwork fraud into a confrontation with voters in their own living rooms. After the ballots went out, Sheriff Bowman drove the dirt roads of eastern Lincoln County and personally visited the homes of the voters whose names appeared on the applications. He sat down at kitchen tables. He sat on living room couches. He talked about the race. He explained who he supported. In at least 6 cases, according to the federal record, he physically took the ballot out of the voter's hands and marked it himself. In other cases, he sat in the room and pointed at the candidates while the voter held the pen. Several voters told investigators they had felt uneasy. They had asked whether what was happening was even legal. They had been told, by a uniformed sheriff sitting on their couch, that it absolutely was. Former County Commissioner Thomas Ramey Jr., 32 years old, participated alongside Bowman. Ramey filled out a number of the false applications. After several applications had already been submitted to Whitten's office and processed, Ramey directed another person to go back and alter the applications, changing details that did not match the voter records. Those altered applications were then refiled. Whitten processed those too. For the entire spring of 2010, Donald Whitten knew. He knew the applications were being hand-delivered by the same man, the sheriff, instead of arriving by mail from the voters themselves. He knew the volume was wildly outside any normal year. He knew several of the names on the applications were people who lived in their own homes, not in any nursing facility. He knew his office had a legal obligation to verify the stated reason for absentee eligibility, and that obligation was not being met. He stamped them anyway. He logged them anyway. He let the ballots leave the office anyway. No one in room 12 raised an objection. No deputy clerk filed a formal concern. No one called the Secretary of State. The system trusted the clerk. The clerk trusted the sheriff. The sheriff was the one writing the applications. The closed loop had only 3 names in it, and all 3 of them held public office. The vote was counted on May 11th, 2010. Sheriff Jerry Bowman defeated the incumbent, Charles Brumfield, in the Democratic primary for circuit clerk. The absentee vote in Lincoln County was the difference. Bowman ran up enormous margins in the absentee column out of precincts in the eastern part of the county. Brumfield won Election Day voting. Bowman won the primary. The anomaly was visible to anyone willing to look. West Virginia Secretary of State Natalie Tennant looked. Her office had been monitoring election irregularities across the state in the wake of the 2004 Lincoln County prosecutions, and the 2010 absentee numbers out of Hamlin set off every alarm she had. Lincoln County had reported absentee ballot totals far beyond historical norms. The bulk of the absentees were concentrated in a handful of precincts. The bulk of those absentees broke heavily for one candidate. The pattern did not look like an election. It looked like a project. Within days of the primary, Tennant authorized an investigation. She hired Jim Wise, a retired FBI agent with decades of experience working federal cases out of Charleston, and assigned him to work alongside the Secretary of State's existing investigators. The FBI's Charleston field office assigned its own agents to the case. The U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of West Virginia, Booth Goodwin, was briefed within weeks. Brumfield, the defeated incumbent, did not concede. He filed a formal election contest. A West Virginia circuit judge ordered every contested absentee ballot pulled and reviewed. More than 300 absentee ballots from Lincoln County were thrown out as legally invalid. When the numbers were recalculated without the fraudulent absentees, Charles Brumfield, the incumbent, was the winner of the Democratic primary for circuit clerk. The court awarded him the nomination. Sheriff Bowman's primary victory was erased. That by itself was a political earthquake. But the federal investigation was already moving. Investigator Jim Wise had begun pulling the actual applications out of Donald Whitten's office. He had begun interviewing the voters listed on those applications. He had begun comparing handwriting. He had begun, slowly and methodically, building a timeline of who delivered what, when, to whom, and what Donald Whitten had known when his rubber stamp came down. We're heading into the federal investigation now, and the way they unraveled this one is something else. Before we get there, take a second. If you appreciate this kind of coverage, where the names of the actual officials get said out loud and the actual paperwork gets walked through, subscribe and turn the bell on. These cases out of Appalachia do not get the coverage they deserve, and the only reason they keep getting told is because viewers like you keep showing up for them. Jim Wise approached the investigation the way a retired FBI agent approaches anything, slowly, on paper, without telling anyone what he had until he had it all. He started with the voter list. He took every absentee ballot application filed in Lincoln County for the May 2010 primary, more than 300 of them, and he matched each one against the registered voter rolls. He pulled the voters' actual signatures from prior years and compared them to the handwriting on the 2010 applications. The handwriting on the applications did not match the voters. The handwriting on the applications was, in most cases, only one or two different hands. Over and over, the same loops, the same slanted T's, the same way of writing the letter R. Then he went to the voters themselves. He drove the back roads of Lincoln County. He sat on porches. He pulled chairs up to kitchen tables. He showed people the applications. The voters told him what had happened. Many of them said the sheriff had come to their door. Some said a county commissioner had filled out the application for them. Several said the sheriff had sat in their living room while they voted and had marked the ballot himself when they hesitated. At least 6 said the sheriff had taken the ballot from their hands and physically filled in the bubbles. Wise built a chart. Down one column, the names of the voters. Down the next column, the date the application was filed. Down the next column, who actually filled out the application according to the voter. Down the next column, who delivered it to the clerk's office. Down the next, what Donald Whitten's office had logged. The chart filled a wall. The pattern was unmistakable. Sheriff Bowman appeared on the delivery column over and over and over again. Thomas Ramey appeared on the application completion column more than a dozen times. The voters appeared nowhere except as names at the top of forms they had never signed. In the spring of 2011, Wise sat down with Donald Whitten for a formal interview. The clerk came in voluntarily. He was offered the opportunity to make a statement. He was asked specifically whether he had ever provided absentee ballots to anyone for hand delivery outside the normal mail process. He said no. He said the procedures had been followed. He said the ballots had gone out by mail to the voters in every case. He said it under penalty of federal law to a retired FBI agent. That statement was false. Whitten knew it was false at the moment he made it. He had handed sealed ballot envelopes back to Sheriff Bowman in his own office, multiple times, in the months leading up to the May primary. He had known the ballots were going to be hand-delivered. He had known they were not going to be filled out in private. He said no anyway. That single lie to a federal investigator on a tape recording would become the specific federal charge that ended his career. The investigation kept moving. Wise's team subpoenaed Whitten's office records, including the application logs, the ballot supply records, and the dated correspondence between the county clerk's office and the Secretary of State. They subpoenaed Sheriff Bowman's call records, his vehicle logs, and his deputies' shift assignments. They interviewed Thomas Ramey. They interviewed dozens of additional voters. By early 2012, the federal record was complete. A federal grand jury was convened in Charleston, and on the basis of the evidence, the U.S. Attorney's Office prepared indictments against 3 men: Sheriff Jerry Bowman, former Commissioner Thomas Ramey Jr., and County Clerk Donald Whitten. The moment Donald Whitten understood that it was over happened on a Tuesday in March 2012 in a federal building in Charleston, West Virginia, with his attorney sitting beside him and Stephen Ruby, counsel to the U.S. Attorney, across the table. Ruby slid a manila folder across the table. Inside the folder was a stack of absentee ballot applications, neatly clipped, every one of them stamped with Donald Whitten's office seal. Beside that stack was another folder. Inside that one were the transcribed statements of voters whose names appeared on the applications, each statement signed and witnessed, each one describing what had actually happened in their homes. Beside that folder was a third one. Inside that one was the transcript of the interview Whitten had given a year earlier, with the line where he had said no absentee ballots had been hand-delivered highlighted in yellow. Ruby did not raise his voice. He did not have to. He asked a single question. "Mr. Whitten, do you stand by the statement you gave to Investigator Wise about absentee ballots being hand-delivered out of your office?" Whitten's attorney leaned forward. "Don't answer that." Ruby waited. "Mr. Whitten, the applications are right here. The voters have all been interviewed. The sheriff has agreed to cooperate. We are not asking you whether it happened. We already know it happened. We are asking you whether the statement you gave us, under federal law, on tape, was a true statement." Whitten looked at the folder on the table. Then he looked at his attorney. Then he looked down at his hands. "I want to talk to my lawyer," he said. The meeting ended. Whitten and his attorney left the federal building. 2 weeks later, on March 14th, 2012, Donald Whitten signed a plea agreement in U.S. District Court for the Southern District of West Virginia. He pleaded guilty to 1 federal count of making a false statement in violation of Title 18, United States Code, Section 1001. He admitted that on the date of his interview with Investigator Wise, he had told federal investigators that he had not provided absentee ballots for illegal hand delivery, that the statement was false, and that he knew it was false at the time he made it. Sheriff Bowman pleaded guilty the same month to 1 federal count of conspiracy against rights in violation of Title 18, United States Code, Section 241. Thomas Ramey pleaded guilty in August 2012 to making a false statement to an FBI agent. All 3 men signed agreements requiring them to resign from public office and barring them from holding any future public office anywhere in the United States. Donald Whitten walked out of the federal courthouse, climbed into the passenger seat of his attorney's sedan, and was driven the 55 minutes back to Hamlin. He did not stop at the courthouse on the way home. He went straight to the house on Route 3, sat down at the kitchen table, and told his wife what he had done. Sentencing took place on August 29, 2012, before United States District Judge Thomas E. Johnston in Charleston. Assistant U.S. Attorney Thomas Ryan handled the sentencing for the government, supported by counsel to the U.S. Attorney Stephen Ruby, working under U.S. Attorney Booth Goodwin. The courtroom was full. Reporters from the West Virginia Gazette and the Logan Banner sat in the press row. Several voters whose names had appeared on the falsified applications drove in from Lincoln County and took seats in the public gallery. Charles Brumfield, the incumbent circuit clerk who had been cheated of his primary and then awarded the nomination by the court, sat in the second row. He did not testify, but he was there. The government's sentencing memorandum laid out the scheme in detail. More than 100 falsified absentee ballot applications, at least 6 instances of a uniformed sheriff personally marking a voter's ballot. More than 300 contested ballots thrown out by a state judge. An entire primary election reversed. A county clerk who had stamped every fraudulent application and then lied about it to a federal investigator. The memo described Whitten as the infrastructure of the fraud, without whom the scheme could not have functioned. It asked the court to impose a sentence that reflected the gravity of the betrayal. Whitten's defense attorney spoke for nearly 30 minutes. He described Whitten's 39 years of public service in Lincoln County. He described his marriage, his daughters, his grandchildren, his church. He described a man who had made a single catastrophic decision under the pressure of an old colleague and had compounded that decision with a single lie to a federal agent. He asked for probation. Then Whitten stood and addressed the court. He said he was sorry. He said he had betrayed the office. He said he had no excuse. He said he understood the damage he had done, not just to the voters whose names had been used, but to every voter in Lincoln County who would now have to wonder, every time they cast a ballot, whether the person counting it was honest. He said he had earned whatever the court decided. Judge Johnston then delivered his sentencing statement. He spoke for several minutes. He said the position of county clerk in West Virginia was, by statute, the guardian of the franchise. He said the chief election officer of a county was the one person in that county whose oath was, above all else, to count what the voters had actually said. He said that when the guardian became the gate by which the fraud entered, the harm was not only to the individual voters who had been deceived, but to every voter in every future election who would now carry a small piece of doubt with them into the booth. He said the sentence had to reflect that. He sentenced Donald Whitten to 1 year and 6 months in federal prison. 18 months. 3 years of supervised release to follow. A $5,000 fine. It was the longest election fraud sentence handed down in the Southern District of West Virginia in recent memory. Sheriff Jerry Bowman was sentenced the same day to 1 year and 1 day in federal prison, 3 years of supervised release, and a $5,000 fine. Thomas Ramey was sentenced separately on November 15, 2012. All 3 men were required to resign their offices effective immediately and were permanently barred from holding any public office in the United States. Donald Whitten reported to federal prison in the fall of 2012. He served his time at a low-security federal facility in the Mid-Atlantic region. His wife visited him every other weekend, driving the 4 hours each way from Hamlin. He was released to supervised probation in the spring of 2014 and returned to the 1-story house on Route 3, where he had lived for nearly 40 years. He never sought public office again. He could not have, even if he had wanted to. Lincoln County held its next election cycle in 2014. The Secretary of State's office posted independent observers at every precinct. The absentee ballot numbers came in roughly normal. A new county clerk took over room 12 on the 2nd floor of the Hamlin courthouse. The framed copy of the West Virginia oath of office that Donald Whitten had hung behind his desk was taken down, boxed up, and put in storage. The wall stayed empty for a long time. This case was small and quiet. But this next case on the right-hand side is louder, uglier, and ends in a much darker place. Click it now.